armed ones may pull that gun in a situation where they shouldn't. They may misdiagnose the situation. And I believe anytime that gun is fired, it's a negative for the association.
Hello and welcome to Policy Party. I'm here with my partner, Phil Masi, and in today's episode, we thought, let's talk about armed guards. So this is a topic that comes up more often than I would like with our community associations. And it's whether or not to hire guards, if we do hire guards, if they should be direct employees of the association, third party, armed or unarmed. So I wanted to get with you, Phil, on your thoughts on what do you think about armed guards?
Yeah, the answer is no.
No.
No, I'm just kidding. I mean, like, I think everybody thinks it's a better idea. Like, I get this a lot where boards feel that if the guards are armed, that the folks are less likely, they're criminals, to commit criminal acts in front of an armed guard, but they would commit that same criminal act in front of an unarmed guard. And I don't really think that holds. I think just having the guard there is the defense that you need. It's going to prevent the things, right? It's a guard sitting there. They could call the police if something's going on. Obviously, someone's not going to commit a crime in front of that unarmed guard. So I don't buy that if they're armed, it's going to make you necessarily safer. In fact, I think the opposite can be true, depending on the guard's training, because there's a vast difference between these guards that are, that are being security guards for whatever reason they might have. Armed ones may pull that gun in a situation where they shouldn't. They may misdiagnose the situation. And I believe anytime that gun is fired, it's a negative for the association. I mean, even if it hits the person they want to hit, but oftentimes they can miss, goes through a window, hits somebody sleeping, whatever the situation might be, it can be significant and could be worse for the association. And we've seen that firsthand locally with the whole Trayvon Martin situation. That wasn't a guard, but it just gives you an idea of how, basically a neighborhood watch or policing of an association can lead to something very significant from a loss perspective.
Yeah, and just to let our boards know, a lot of the policies, they don't allow for you to hire armed guards, right? It's a problem. If the underwriter had known this, or if you hire, or if you're considering hiring an armed guard during the policy period, can you talk about whether or not that's information they should provide to their insurance agent?
Well, yeah, you want to let us know, because there's carriers that will not write if there's an armed guard. And so if the application asks armed or unarmed, and we're selecting unarmed, and then it turns out you've hired armed guards, and then the armed guard gets into some sort of issue, it would depend on the scenario, but there could be a situation where the carrier says, hey, listen, they did not tell us accurate information. We would have not written this policy had they informed us of this. So we always want to know that. That's such a large underwriting factor that it's really important that our clients, inform us if they're going to be using armed guards. Armed guards are more expensive too. And yeah. I think what people think is that the armed guard is just going to be a more competent guard. And that may absolutely be true in some scenarios where they just have higher training and they're more competent and you have the money to afford it. But I just don't know that holds in every scenario. And I've had so many examples in my career where it's not worked out to the benefit of the association and it's created a bigger problem. And I just don't think it's worth it. Plus, the insurance carriers are going to charge more for it, the ones that will do it. If they'll write it, yeah. If they'll write it. And then they're going to put, potentially exclusions on the policy. You may get firearms exclusions or things added that you wouldn't have otherwise, or deductibles will be higher, premiums are higher. So it's not all in a vacuum either. I mean, there's consequences just on the insurance side from doing it, let alone what the increased risk is to the association.
Yes. Okay. So just to put in perspective how big of a deal this is, Phil and I were just in San Diego at the Community Association Institute Law Seminar. And one of the case laws they brought up, or one of the scenarios, is that the general liability and umbrella carrier, there was a claim. It wasn't involving firearms, but the same would hold true in this scenario. There was a claim that popped, and the insurance carrier said, we're not going to cover it. We're going to give you your money back for the premium, and we're not going to cover it because the application was not filled out correctly.
Called a material misrepresentation.
So the point is, if you're considering hiring an armed guard, if you don't tell whoever your agent is, and the application checked no armed guards, and now a claim pops, what the carrier could do is they could come back and say, hey, here was your application. You said no armed guards. We would have never covered you had we known.
Yeah, and then this gets more complicated too. Like you have scenarios where you don't have armed guards when you write the policy, and then 6 months in, you decide to hire a service that ends up having armed guards.
Yes.
So just our recommendation is to not have armed guards. It's pretty simple, just easy rule there. I would tell you, I mean, 99% of my communities, I mean, it's very few, and I know them kind of on one hand that have armed guards. So it's not something you see all the time, but I don't think folks understand why. And so I thought this helpful there.
Yes. And just before we wrap this up, police officers.
Yeah, different story. So the police officers, you can get off duty, or you can get the police to patrol, and that is not really considered an armed guard because they're police officers. They're not a security service. But there can be complications with that too, because sometimes the police officer or the like, let's say it's OU or Orlando Police Department or wherever it might be, they may say, okay, we'll go ahead and give you this service, but you need to list us an additional insured on your policy. That's where you get problems. I mean, most of the liability insurance policies are
going to say no way.
Yeah, they're not going to list the police officers. They're not going to take on the risk of the police department. And so you end up having to sign away that you're indemnifying them in your contract, but we can't give you that coverage a lot of times. So it can get complicated there. Generally, though, I don't believe a police officer is clearly not the same thing as an armed guard. I don't mind that as much, but you got to be careful in whatever the contract wording is, because each of these, whether it's the county or it's individual cities, they all have different policies and contracts in place. And when you have to indemnify them as the association to hire them, that's problematic because you're likely not going to get that coverage on the liability policy.
Well, thank you, Phil. And for our associations and managers that are tuning in today, if you're considering hiring an armed guard, don't. But if you absolutely have to, be sure to reach out to us to get our thoughts. Thank you for joining us today on Policy Party.